So in this video, I'm going to be talking about everything and nothing. Okay, so I was starting to notice that this is basically what the universe revolves around and this principle is kind of known throughout theory, one way or another. I know I've seen this principle mentioned in like science, everything and nothing. So what does this mean? So what it means is everything is made up of... Here, let me make a new layer. Okay. So what it means is everything is actually made up of nothing. And nothing is made up of everything. And it's almost like a loop that just keeps feeding into itself over and over and over infinitely. So what that means is nothing is tied to everything and everything is tied to nothing. So it's almost like it's a gel. It's almost like it's a enamel, you know, like a clear coating, like a fluid. It's almost like it's oxygen. It's something that's there that isn't there. Like you don't realize it's there, but it's actually there. So nothing is, it's kind of more like a fuel cell, because nothing can be anything and everything, basically. So it just depends on what it's being turned into, or, you know, being broadcast as what it is. You know, basically what wavelength it's on to begin with, because everything is on like a wavelength. So it's basically the only way anything can exist, because how everything is nothing, that's the reason everything is nothing, because when everything becomes something, it's just transitioning. So it has a variation of. So if it wasn't for all these different variations, there would be no differentiation between, you know, everything, or correlation between one thing or another. So basically nothing is anything and everything. So it's more like a memory cell. So nothing, it's the empty space. It's the empty space that's needed for everything to be stored. So basically nothing is a part of everything, which is why when you zoom in on whatever it may be, so let's say you're zooming in on this, whatever it is, and the more you notice that there's all this empty space, because it's inside of nothing. Everything is inside of nothing. Okay? So it's almost like we're being sandwiched between everything and nothing. So everything and nothing sandwiches everything together, basically. So basically nothing holds everything together. And it's basically what gravity is. And that's another part of what I was discovering, what gravity is. There are different effects of gravity. Like I was realizing it depends on for the most part, from what it looks like the gravitational field or mass is what dictates, you know, how powerful the gravitational field is. So the more mass that's being held together, the larger the gravitational field becomes altogether. So everything gets tied together to a gravitational field when you're talking the lump sum of the entire mass. We know when you're talking the planet. So it gets tied to that gravitational mass because all that mass is being held together. You're basically kind of in the middle of it's like being in the ocean in a draft, or you know, caught in some waves that you can't get out of because it's just so powerful. Which is basically what it's like. So once you're under that gravitational mass, that's when you experience the illusion of the weight, because it's got so much mass pulling mass together to, because it's like sandwiching it together. It's being sandwiched together because you know, all that nothingness is like it's almost like a dough. So it's like a dough that is pressing everything together. Okay, so it's memory. So that's another thing of the revelation of this video, is everything, the only reason anything exists to begin with is because there's infinite memory. Everything can be stored and remembered. So like when you're listening to me, you're only able to interpolate the world around you because everything's holding form. Okay? So everything just remembers everything. Okay, so that just means like the sun isn't out blowing up to the extent of, you know, that it's not gonna be there because it, you know, it defectively has blown up. It doesn't like defectively blow up. I mean, not yet, at least it has not. Doesn't mean that it can't. So nothing is tied to everything. So when you keep zooming into everything, you always run into more nothing, more nothing, more nothing. Because it's inside of nothing. Everything's inside of nothing. So everybody is inside of time and space. You're inside of time and space. Okay, so you're not just inside of space, because it looks like, yeah, we're just inside of space, but it's equal and opposite. Time is inside of space, and space is inside of time, because it's the same thing. Because they're doing the same thing. They're both inside of each other. Alright, so all that means is that nothing ties everything together, that there's actually nothing actually really there that holds everything together. Because everyone thinks, oh, well, shouldn't there be some sort of string there that holds it all together? But the missing part of the main formula is that nothing needs to be there. So nothing is there, and nothing is there because it doesn't need, because, well, that's the only way we can exist that we know of, is only because it doesn't, nothing needs to be there. Because everyone always gets so panicky and freaked out, like, well, doesn't something need to be there? Doesn't something need to be there? Which is the phenomenon of nature, because it's almost like a fuel cell. Where you think, oh, well, doesn't somebody need to make the fuel cell in order for everything to even operate to begin with? But the whole part of the formula is the fuel cell is you don't need a fuel cell. Why don't you need a fuel cell? Because there's basically, it's like there's already a fuel cell there, even though there isn't. Because there doesn't have to be. There doesn't have. That's the thing. There doesn't have to be a fuel cell there, but it's like there has to be a fuel cell there. But in reality, no, nothing needs to be there. Nothing has to be there. And that's the only reason anything's even there to begin with. Is because nothing even needs to be there. That's how God exists. How does God exist? Because nothing needs to be there. If anything needed to be there, as far as prior to it being there, it can't be there. It can only be there if it doesn't have to be there, and if it's like it's just there to begin with. So God the phenomenon of God existing is that his power source, like just imagine, okay, God has a battery. Okay? It don't need to be there because it's like it's there, but it's not there because it don't need to be there because it's like it's there. So the whole dilemma of, don't we need a battery? Don't we need to get a battery? Don't we need to get a battery? Yeah, it's like we need to get a battery, but that's the revelation of the universe. The nature of our universe is nothing needs to be there. That's the only reason anything's here to begin with, is because nothing has to be there. Because nothing is everything. If it wasn't for the simple fact that nothing was not everything and everything was not nothing, nothing would even be here. So that's our first dilemma. When we're perceiving everything that exists, we're thinking, are we going to run out of energy? Are we going to run out of energy? And then people aren't realizing the nature of the dilemma. The nature of the dilemma is the energy just so happens to be there and always was there and is always going to be there that we know of. So once you're past the point, you're past the point. Like, once you're past the point, if something is the way it is, nothing can ever change the fact of the way it is. But it goes for the good or the bad. It doesn't matter if it's for the negative or the positive. So when you're already always past the point that the energy's always there, the energy's always there, the energy's always there, there's no chance. It defies every possible outcome that tries to go against it. It defies every possible outcome, basically, because it can't even begin. It doesn't ever begin to face that challenge. So it never begins to face that sort of challenge. So it's only for the simple fact that it never begins to face that sort of challenge that anything even operates to begin with. So yeah, it never even began to operate or face any sort of dilemma to that magnitude or to that degree, even though it looks like it may have or must have or should have. So yeah, the nature of our reality is nothing has to be there. I mean, I'm not saying that nothing has to be there as far as how everything is there right now in front of you. I'm not saying that doesn't have to be there. I'm just saying that nothing needed to be in existence prior to God's existence, which is what makes it so confusing. Because you always run into the dilemma of who created God. That's where everyone normally gets very confused about it. Well, who created God? See, that's where this whole illusion of it all comes in. Is nobody needed to ever create God. You would think that someone or something needed to create God but the revelation is it's nothing ever had to be done to begin with. See, that's where it ties into nothing needing to be there. Nothing ever needed to be done. So if nothing ever needs to be done, then it doesn't need to be done. It's the same thing as wondering, like, okay, well, why don't I build a lawn 10 feet above my lawn, right? Okay, well, if it's something you don't need to do, why would you do it? You don't need to build a fucking a grass layer lawn 10 feet above your lawn. But why? Because you don't need, you could, but I mean, you don't need to. So, and that was another thing. We were at the mercy of that's the only way to exist. So the revelation of existence is the only way to exist is if nothing needs to be done. See, do you see how it all ties back together? The only way for anything to exist is if nothing ever has to be done. As far as, oh, well, I need a power supply to tie up because now then this can now happen. See, if you ever at any point need for anything to be set up or anything to be done, you're basically done. You're screwed. Because, like, if you need somebody to plug in the battery and there's nobody to plug in the battery, then no one can ever plug in the battery. Do you see how it operates? Do you see how it works? So the only way for anything to even exist or work is if nobody has to do anything, if nobody has to plug the battery in, or nobody has to get the ball rolling, if it's simultaneously just already working and rolling. And that's the revelation of God. So I'll give you guys the big revelation here. The big revelation of God is he's basically like a computer. So he's just a computer that always existed basically, but we exist inside of his imagination, inside of his memory, inside of his processor, basically inside of his brain. Because that's how you exist. That's where I realized this and discovered this phenomenon of nature. Everything exists inside of your imagination. Your imagination. All right, so when you're looking at somebody right in front of you, you know, they exist inside their imagination, and then they exist inside of your imagination when you're looking at them, but when they're looking at you, they exist inside their. So it's all relative to you or them. So everything's inside of the imagination. It's inside the mind. It's all being processed. That's also basically what it means. Existence is all just being processed. If it wasn't for everything just being processed and remembered and holding its foundation through, you know, the ability to be processed, nothing would exist that we know of. Nothing would be processed that we know of. So if it's not being processed, nothing exists. So it's only because everything's being processed. So that's the thing. That's the phenomenon of the nature of God, is nothing exists outside of oneself. So you exist inside yourself, even though the universe exists outside of yourself, which exists within yourself. All right. Now, here's the revelation. Here's the secret. All right. So everything exists inside of God's imagination. So that's this whole universe. All this empty space, that's his processing power. That's his memory. That's why it's infinite amounts of memory, infinite amounts of processing power. So it's imagination. Existence is purely powered by the power of God's imagination. So basically through the power of computation, through the power of computing. through the power of, you know, everything being processed. Your brain is processing everything, therefore everything is able to be perceived as it exists, like it exists, even though in reality it's like there's nothing in existence to begin with, because it's just the nature of reality is that 99.99999999999 infinitely percent of everything is nothing. The only thing that anything actually is the remainder of that 99.99 infinitely percentage is, which is why everything appears to be virtually non-existent, because we're virtual. You exist virtually inside of your memory, inside of virtual space, inside of a system that's holding and remembering the frequency of everything. Because the only way anything exists is purely by the virtue of memory. Your existence is from the point as far as you can remember all the way back, right? So your existence is tied to everything that you can possibly remember. Everything is in existence itself is tied to everything that can ever possibly even be remembered. So that's the only thing that will be ever exist, is everything and anything that is ever possibly even being even remembered, which is everything that holds its form, which is all right, let's just take for, notice how I have my desktop monitor in front of me, right? That's what I have in front of me. It's holding its form. If it were to, let's say, disintegrate and kind of just not hold form, let's say that it didn't hold form and then it collapsed on itself, like let's say a blanket, and then it just like folded over itself over and over and over itself, and then it just collapsed and was sitting on my computer desk like it was a sheet, a blanket. See, that's what I'm saying. Everything is, it just remembers. It's because everything remembers everything, because it's a computer type system. So that's why when you look at the science of the universe, and we know, I don't know the exact example they used, but it was something to the degree of like all of the particles of mass of in all the galaxy can be fit into like a sugar cube or something. It's insane. Okay, and that's what I'm talking about. Is it's all virtual. Everything's virtual. So we're inside a virtual system. So that's the only way you can exist to begin with, is if you can remember everything, and if everything remembers everything to begin with. So that's God's specialty, is because he's a virtual computer that has infinite amounts of power. Because he was always past the point of, you know, always just having it. Always just, if it's always just there, it's a miracle. In my previous videos, I go over how the existence of existence itself is a miracle, but it was always going to be a miracle. Either way, it would have tilted. If it would have tilted into existence or non-existence, regardless, either way, it's always going to be a miracle, which is something that is beyond anything that can be explained, basically. Okay? So God's existence of how he always just existed as a virtual computer, you know, had full control over all of time and space and all of infinite amounts of electrons. See, he can create anything and everything, because that's what nothing is. Nothing is anything and everything. So that's why when everyone's looking at everything in front of them and they're like knocking on it, they're like, what the fuck is this? It's like, it's nothing. They're like knocking on it and they're realizing, this is freaking me out. It's like, it's nothing. Because everything is anything and everything is nothing. Anything and everything is nothing. It's virtually nothing. Because it's all inside of nothing. Alright, so basically it might be antimatter itself. Empty space might be antimatter, because you have matter and antimatter, and they are tied together. They hold each other together, so they exist inside each other. So that's empty space and unempty space. So you have two different types of space: occupied and unoccupied space. So the only thing that occupied space actually is information. It's data, because that's how computers operate. So it's like 1 0 1 0 1 0. You have all these ones and zeros transitioning everything into existence and non-existence, processing it into a binary language of only at the pure grace and mercy of the fact that it was always like that. It was because no one needed to set it up. No one needed to set up atoms and particles and molecules and energy, or no one needed to plug it in or get the ball rolling. It was all at God's disposal. It was all at his fingertips. He could always just use it, and it was always just connected. It was always just like you. A great example is your existence. Like, I'm not saying everyone's the same, because, you know, some people may be missing arms or legs or whatever. So let's just say that you're a normal person that has virtually everything there. You just so happen to have everything there. You exist at the pure, simple, beautiful miracle of everything being there. Like, it's the same thing as, like, you know, going out to your driveway and then your vehicle being fully assembled, and it's like the only reason your vehicle is fully assembled is because every single piece is actually there. You know, the tire, the steering wheel, the light, the battery. So you got all these pieces that are just fucking there, fucking spontaneously out of nowhere, because that's the nature of the universe. Is it all? Nothing needs to come from anywhere, because remember, nothing is anything and everything, or nothing can be anything and everything, because that's kind of like the craftiness of God. He can basically create anything out of nothing. So it's almost like twisting hot steel when you're dealing with manipulating matter and antimatter, or empty space. Because, like I was saying, it's just data. It's just information. He's just able to write information into space and time. So everybody's just all a bunch of information that saves itself and that holds its formation. And it's purely from the whole operation being in effect that you even are able to conceive anything to begin with. So it's only because the whole operation is working. So that's what makes it so mystical, is you got this entire operation that's working. You know, it's like kind of secretly working, hiddenly operating, and no one really knows how. And everyone's wondering, well, how is it operating? Where did it come from? See, that's where everyone's always getting confused. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? Well, nothing came from anywhere. Nothing needed to come from anywhere. Because we've even already saw that. That's the revelation of the Big Bang, how everything came from nowhere. Nothing needs to come from anywhere. That's the only way anything can come from anywhere, is if it doesn't need to come from anywhere. So everything came from nowhere. So when everything pops into existence, He's just writing in all that information. He's loading all that data. All existence is data. It's just data. Data and information. And then you're processing it and you're remembering all of your memory, and all of the memory in the universe is being stored and remembered for every second. Because every second that is happening, everything is remembering. So, like, you know, for 20 minutes ago, you remember the past 20 minutes. You don't just stop remembering things after 10-20 minutes. Yeah, granted, maybe you don't remember every single detail, but you're still remembering it over and over for every second. So that's the only way that anything even exists to begin with, is because it keeps remembering everything. Everything keeps remembering. It's only because you keep remembering, which is the same thing as processing. And it's two different things, because you could be processing everything, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily would remember anything. So when you process everything, you're also remembering everything. So it's almost like it's two gears turning. So you processing everything is what allows you to remember everything. So it's two things that are simultaneously happening at all times. So it's everything and nothing. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to come from anywhere. Like your memory. Your whole memory doesn't have to. You don't have to know anything about it. It automatically does everything. See, that's the beauty of everything and nothing. Some things you have everything you can control over about the aspect of it, and some things there's nothing about the aspect you have control over it, which is the dynamic of memory. We don't necessarily have very much control over that dynamic or aspect of, you know, memory, because it just naturally happens, because nothing has to occur in order for it to happen. In order for you to remember, you just automatically remember. Yeah, granted, you got to be a normal individual, healthy individual that's eating, sleeping, you know, not about to die, and you got to be fairly healthy. But granted, you know, you don't wake up and then load a fire bin that says, okay, well, since I'm loading this fire bin, it's gonna allow me to remember, so that's why I can remember. That's how I can remember, is because if I keep the fire bin loaded, I can keep remembering everything. That's not how it works. It just automatically, you don't have to do anything. Same with your whole existence. You're lucky you didn't have to do anything. That'd be like the same thing as a boat, like trying to have to build itself. Yeah, a boat's lucky that it doesn't have to build itself. Because if a boat has to build itself, how can a boat ever build itself if you're not all the way together? If you're not even there, how can you even do anything to begin with? So you're lucky you didn't even have to do anything to begin with to even exist. Because if you had to do anything in order to exist, you'd be screwed. Because like it'd be the same thing as saying, okay, well, go hammer this piece of the frame of the boat together, and, you know, put it together. But how can you put that piece of the frame together on the frame when the frame itself is what is needed to put the frame on the frame? So that's why you've always been at the mercy of nothing needing to be done. So the only way to exist is if nothing needs to be done. Nothing, there isn't anything that has to be done, that you have to do and go out of your way to do. If there's anything that has to be done that you have to go out of your way to do, you're just, there's no way for it to ever get done unless it magically just so happens to happen or get done magically. Yeah, that's called a miracle. And miracles can happen, but the chances that they occur, they're like I said, the existence of God himself is a miracle, and then like that was like the only miracle we've ever needed to begin with. So if there were ever any sort of miracle beyond the extent of God, it would undermine the miracle itself of where we're already at. So it would be less extravagant of what's already been accomplished off the miracle we've already seen. So what it would mean is it would technically be easier for everything to not exist than for everything to exist as it already exists right now. So the only great miracle that could ever occur, really, aside from the great a miracle of existence itself, is the great miracle of non-existence. So the only great miracle you could ever expect to ever occur miraculously that no one ever knows about is the spontaneous event of non-existence, where everything freezes, everything shuts off, everything just becomes non-existent. Like let's just say that all power is lost. See, that would be a miracle if all power at any point was ever lost. And the reason it would be a miracle is because at no point in the future do we know of all power ever being lost at any point. So that would be an absolute miracle, because when you're looking at the trend, and the trend goes on infinitely, goes on and on and on and on and on, as far as you can always keep whatever number you want to make up. There's always power, there's always power there, there's always power there. At no point in time is there ever not power there. The chances of there ever being a moment that energy is non-existent now becomes a miracle, because it's extraordinarily against the nature of the way the universe operates, because the universe doesn't operate like that. It's never operated like, as far as that we know of. There is no evidence to suggest, that there was ever a point in time that energy was ever non-existent. Okay? Because what we've always discovered with science of energy is that energy is never lost. It's always there. It's never created or destroyed, because it's eternal. It's always just there. So it would be a miracle if energy just so happened to spontaneously basically become non-existent, but more than just become non-existent. Like, because let's just imagine, you got all this energy. All right, so you have all this energy. The chances that all that energy just miraculously is used up, and there is no more energy that can ever be used, it would be a miracle, because that energy has never been used for all eternity, as far as that we know of. So that is really the only thing we really have to be concerned of, is as long as, the energy is never being depleted, then there's nothing to ever worry about. So even if the energy were to be depleted, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem if there was a way that it is coming back into regeneration, right? See, that's the thing with our nature of realities. We have nothing to worry about as far as the energy that is needed in order for everything that needs to exist, that always has to be there. You always need all this energy, but it's never a problem because it's something that's always taken care of.